Okay, so really this is a panel discussion, as you probably know. What we want to talk about are some of the challenges that you as customers see. This is to be a fully interactive session, so ideally we don't want to be sitting up here doing all the talking and preaching to you. We'd like to have as much interaction with you, so if you've got questions, if you've got, if we're talking about problems or something like that, and you've got a specific problem that you encountered and you think it's useful for everybody to hear that, then by all means step up and let's have that as part of the discussion. We do have a mic here, so this is recorded, it's videoed, so ideally we'd like you to go to that mic when you're going to ask your question or make your statement, just so everybody can hear it and it'll be part of the recording. Otherwise we have large blank spots in the recording. We do have to start with the disclaimer. I think you've probably all been in a dozen sessions at this point, so you've probably seen this a million times. I'm not going to read through it, but Graham, was there anything you wanted to say on the disclaimer?
No, we're good.
No?
We're good.
Okay. Okay, so let's get straight into it. I often like to start my presentations when I'm meeting with customers talking about VDI, that it's the most complicated solution in IT today. So that's really what we want to try and get through in this session is what are some of the complexities you're going to run into and how can we help you solve that. But before we do that, let's kind of introduce ourselves. I'll start. So I am a CTO and Senior Director of Cloud Client Computing Data Center Business. And Cloud Client Computing is an organization within Dell EMC that is responsible for developing all of the VDI solutions that we sell globally. And our Tier 1 partner, obviously VMware, is a big factor of that. So we develop the reference architectures and the solution guides for you guys to use when you're sizing your environments. So, John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm John Kelly. I'm Associate Director of Enterprise Innovation at the University of Arkansas. I oversee the team that implements a lot of this stuff. So.
Stephen Herzig, Director of Enterprise Systems, University of Arkansas.
Graham Gordon, I'm a Senior Staff Architect with VMware in our UC business unit. I kind of look after Horizon reference architectures, white papers, reviewers' guides, collateral to make it easier to adopt our Horizon stacks.
Luke Wignall, and I'm with NVIDIA. I direct the performance engineering and tech marketing team, so we create on the sort of the graphics and the user experience side, a lot of the documentation, a lot of the labs, a lot of the testing around UX.
Okay, cool. So we're going to start with a little introduction of a new solution that we brought to market back in May at Dell EMC World in partnership with VMware and with NVIDIA, which is VDI Complete. And VDI Complete is basically an all-encompassing solution for VDI deployments. It basically covers everything that you would need in a fully validated packaged solution. So the underlying hardware in that is either a VxRail configuration or a vSAN ready node. That is then teamed with the NVIDIA Grid M10 and M60 cards. And then layered on top of that, we've got Horizon 7 Advanced or Enterprise. And as an optional add-on, you can add in things like wise thin clients, monitors, etc., etc. And really, the key thing with VDI Complete is the ability to pay for that on a per user, per month basis. So we get a lot of customers who are looking at the large CapEx outlay that they need to deliver to have a VDI solution deployed. And they look then at another model, which is obviously a pure cloud delivery through, say, AWS or something like that from a VDI standpoint. And they like that cost per user per month that they can pay OpEx instead of CapEx, but they maybe don't want to have all their infrastructure out on the cloud. So we're kind of trying to service that market and help customers in that way move to an OpEx model by using Dell Financial Services to fund this packaged solution under VDI Complete. And we'll kind of dip in and out of that as we go through this presentation. But I've got a couple of kind of pre-canned questions that we're going to kind of tee off this discussion today. And then as you guys, as we go through some stuff, if you guys have more questions, as I said, please step to the mic. That's the way we want to run this as a panel discussion. Okay, so one of the first things we wanted to start with was what are the ways that VDI deployments and sizing and so on can go wrong. And I'm going to go through each of the panelists to have a bit of a discussion with them. So let's start with University of Arkansas. And what I'd like to do is put up your slide. Maybe you can just take some time, guys, to talk everybody through. I think this is going to be a fairly typical type of deployment that a lot of you would see a lot of similarities in your own environment with what they've had to do and some of the challenges that they've experienced. So, Stephen, do you want to start, maybe?
Yeah, you bet. And maybe I start organizationally.
Yeah,
what we did to drive it through the organization. As in many universities, we have a central IT organization that maintains the enterprise-level systems and applications. Then each department or school or college on the campus has their own small IT staff. And often that's very, very small, maybe 3 or 4 people. They were eager to have VDI. They understood the implications of taking that day-to-day maintenance of deploying desktops and configuring desktops and updating desktops and the time that consumed. They were eager to have that taken off their plate. What they weren't necessarily eager to have was the control that they had over their own destiny taken off their plate. So what we did when we wanted to do VDI, and again, it wasn't really a sell from a technology standpoint, but we got all the players together and got them in a room and discussed how is this going to look? How is this going to work on campus? How do we deploy this in such a way that we achieve our goals and distribute the administration so they're still in control of their own destiny? They can build their own app layers and deploy the applications that they need in the way that they need to do them. And then how are we going to, as a university, cover the cost of this? We realized that in the long run it would be a cost savings, but in the day-to-day, how is that cost covered? Because it's different than going out and buying a bunch of desktops.
Yeah, okay. And John, do you want to talk through maybe some of the technical aspects of what you did in your deployment, which is a lot of what we can see here in this slide?
Sure, yeah. So in a lot of those discussions where we brought people to the table, we were looking at, because it was about a year ago, we were looking at the hyperconverged model. We liked the idea of the building blocks. And when we talked to Dell, they had pitched us this idea of the vSAN Ready nodes, which would give us that package deal and be able to put all that together. And we have this desire to get to either 5,000 desktops or application delivery for our 27,000 students that we have. And so having that fundamental building block and then layering GPU on top of that, right, the grid hardware and then the software piece. And then we bought into the Horizon Enterprise Suite, got us a whole bunch of excellent tools for being able to find out what's actually being used. The deployment of that was one thing, but we built it in order to scale. So we deployed the cloud pod architecture to be able to say we can, that some of our disaster recovery is built into that, but also the scale is built into that. We just add more these blocks to each pod, and then we can kind of drain between the two. So that flexibility from an architectural standpoint was awesome. And then of course we put NSX on there. We decided NSX from the get-go, give it to everybody. So
and by following that architected solution, you were able to deploy this fairly quickly. I mean, you guys were starting, I think you told me in November, and you were ready to go by February, March kind of time frame.
Yeah. We had done some prep work, but really the go from the CIO happened in November.
No, November was a smoke and mirrors demonstration.
Yep.
Here's what we can do. And then he said, do this. And then January we got the equipment in. By March we were delivering.
So how would your confidence level have been had you not had something like vSAN Ready nodes and the integration with Horizon? You think that would have been a much longer project?
I think so. As I've been talking through some of this stuff while we're here, I'm realizing that we picked the right partners, right? The ability for Dell, VMware, and NVIDIA to execute on the vision that they had collectively, and then that we said, yes, that.
Awesome.
And particularly this desire to get to the state where you have a person with their apps and their data, and they all have access to it using that infrastructure, and that background infrastructure looks transparent to the user. That's what we wanted.
Super.
And putting the pieces together was not a simple task. And as John said, we had great support from all our partners. We made the decision early on to do graphics acceleration for everyone, every session. We had debated, well, do we just do it for some students or faculty and not others? But it was a good decision. It was the right decision, the right thing to do, and I would encourage you guys, if you're trying to decide whether you should or not, it makes a big difference, especially if you're running Windows 10.
Yeah, the important bit there is that Windows 10 piece where we said we're going to throw all our energy into getting Windows 10 to work the way we want it to. No splitting resources on that. Windows 10 all the way and GPUs for that.
Cool. Graham, what are some of the challenges you've seen with customers trying to deploy VDI?
So unfortunately, there are many challenges. You know, as you've alluded to, there are lots of moving parts. There's lots of points of integration. There's lots of integration into your existing systems as well that you need to consider, and that's why each environment is unique. Now, we can simplify it down with stuff like VDI Complete. There are a few kind of pitfalls people will fall into, but it's understanding they're there and how to avoid them. So typical ones we see are people taking a pilot approach or a proof of concept, and then all of a sudden magically scaling that up to production. Right? So I've gone back to customers who have been proof of concept on one server, and you go back and, well, this thing isn't working, you know, and I've got 300 users on it. Oh, what do you mean? You haven't actually deployed anything. We have a proof of concept. So do proof of concepts, do pilots, measure all the way along, understand what's there, and then build a production system separately. Never kind of smoothly think you're going to glide from proof of concept into pilot into production and scale up to 5,000 users on the same infrastructure. You need to design each phase, measure against their last point, and go forward like that. Some of the other things we see people do is inheriting the way they do things in a physical desktop environment. So some of their antivirus policies, their group policies, the operational procedures you follow in a physical desktop environment don't apply or are actually hinders your performance in a VDI environment. So stuff like blocking your group policies is a really good starting point, and then starting from scratch. Take away all that stuff you're going to inherit from your physical environment and build from new. Even treat your applications differently, understand how you're going to build them, take it as an opportunity to optimize them for the VDI environment. Don't just take what you've got, drop it into a virtual desktop environment and expect it to work and be optimal. You're not going to get a great density, and your users will not get a great experience. The last thing I'll probably mention is a lot of people will take the easy path of adoption. And by that I mean, what we're trying to strive here is operational efficiency and a great user experience. And part of that operational efficiency comes from making the components non-persistent. So the OS, the application stack, we want to make them throwaway. So floating desktop pools. The applications also should be attached on demand with stuff like app volumes. We want to inject your profile data with User Environment Manager. That takes an effort to engineer and structure. So you need to profile your applications. You need to profile the User Environment Manager to capture the settings that you care about. Right? The danger we've seen with a lot of customers is they'll take the easy path. That's a lot of work to capture my 500 applications. So I'm going to take the easy approach. I'm just going to get everyone persistent desktops. Or I'm going to use app volumes, writable volumes. And that solves my problem. Well, it's kind of masking the problem. And then what you've done is you've operationally hindered yourself. How do you update the desktops if you need to patch them and stuff like that? So put the effort in up front, and it'll be rewarded later.
On that last comment, to me there's some humor there. I always refer to that as being virtually physical. Great, you've gone from physical to virtually physical, right? You really haven't, what have you accomplished other than maybe adding the complexity that you talked about, right? There's that, you really haven't aggregated anything. You haven't made it any easier to wrap your arms around. But your first comment, measure, measure, measure. I mean, we certainly, from our perspective, we've added GPU to this whole equation, which then blows the doors open for a whole bunch more users. And from your opening segment, that it is complex. It's a very complex ecosystem, and even forget VDI for a second. It's a very complex ecosystem if you look at a data center or just a physical environment. Period. All these moving parts and pieces, and then we collect that. Right? How could we expect that to be easier? And so what I think is great about solutions like this is that from our perspective, if I'm not having to think about all the little minutia, but instead have convenient building blocks to, known elements that I can then measure very quickly what's not going right or what is going right, what to repeat, what not to repeat, what knobs to turn. I think that's what becomes critical. And from a GPU perspective, you're going from maybe a more limited user type selection that you could help to virtually any user type, which means you're adding just that much more in terms of opportunity for complexion. There we go. And how are you supposed to manage that, right? So measure, measure, measure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and as a customer on all three of Graham's points, we hit all of those. The first one, just real briefly, I'll tell you how we got around some of those. The first one, we decided, okay, the first big win we could have is in labs. It's a smallish deployment, but it leaps us from the proof of concept straight to the production on a small scale, and then we can grow that out. So that was a strategy we employed, right, to be able to say, we can't just do it all at once. We just can't. So let's do it small. And the second piece you mentioned, fortunately we had this, I had come from the networking side, taken over the virtualization team, we went with VDI, and we had this great relationship with some of the silos on campus where we had taken resources from those teams and said, hey, do you want to come be part of something really cool and embed with us, either 30, 50% of your time, and bridge those silos in order to deliver this, because there are so many different elements of it that us being together in a room and greasing the wheels for communication was partially what made it go faster.
Yeah. Okay. I think the next thing that we want to try and talk about really is sizing and scaling. One of the things that we've done within Dell EMC with VxRail and vSAN ready nodes is a heavy amount of validation. So we use an industry standard validation tool called Login VSI. Most of you have probably heard of it. If you haven't, you can check them out on the show floor. But what it allows us to do is to test different user types so that we know within a reasonable margin of error, a couple of % margin of error, that the densities that we tell you will get with these configurations are pretty much what you will get. So we're not going to make wild claims of 400 or 500 users on a single R730 with 128 gigs of memory. It's completely unrealistic. Common kind of things that we look at in that validation process are things like screen resolution, which a lot of vendors don't do. They try and go for the hero number, so they validate with 800 by 600. And I mean, when was the last time you used 800 by 600? As you go up through your screen resolution, your densities go down. Usually as you're going up, if you hit say between 800 by 600 and up to say 1920 by 1080, you're probably going to lose about 20% of your CPU capacity. So that's where GPUs kind of come in, and we've been in this industry for quite a long time now, the three of us, and every year we've kind of said, oh, this might be the year for VDI, and it's never been the year for VDI. It's been a steady trickle. But one of the things that's kind of driving a lot of VDI adoption at the moment is Win 10, and some of the challenges that we've got around graphics requirements for Win 10 are pretty strong. So, Luke, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about what you see with customers and how the GPU capabilities are solving that problem.
Well, I can't tell this story without these two gentlemen, because they're the fly in my ointment. Because when we do these tests, we're doing benchmarks, we're creating load on the system and trying to measure that load. And if you come see one of our sessions at our booth, we're showing some metrics that we gathered over the last month that clearly show that just Office apps, Office 2016, on Windows 10, you can expect under a reasonable workload, this is a real user, somebody functioning on that workload is looking at about 600, 650 megs of frame buffer. We're talking to, quote unquote, a knowledge worker, right? Who's this person? Why are they using 650 megs of GPU? And so that dictates a 1 gig profile, because 512 is insufficient. If they go over that, it flows into system memory. Now you're back to CPU contention, right? So that impacts scalability and user experience. And then they show up and they're like, yeah, we're happy at 512. So
it works.
We'd be happier at 1 gig, but right, it's a density problem there.
And to your point, how many monitors?
Yep.
One.
It's one monitor, 1440p.
Yeah.
1440p. You go to 2. Have you tested that?
Only two 1080p monitors,
right.
Not two 1440s, yeah.
And that really is where this becomes, back to the measure thing. But the challenge is, with Windows 10, we're seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of a 32% increase in GPU requirement from the operating system alone. So I don't care who we're talking about from a user type. I always say, you may be the world's greatest engineer, or architect, or whatever, but you also check your email. So we're all knowledge workers, right? Every one of us. And so we're starting with that. And if we're starting at a 32% increase in graphics requirement, then how would anyone expect to operate without it? Yep. Because that's going directly to back to CPU and impacting scalability and performance.
And for me, my team is strongly focused on the data center side of the business, but I've got a counterpart who delivers the wise thin client side of the business. And what we frequently see is that customers will spend an enormous amount of money on the data center infrastructure. And then they'll go out and buy the cheapest thin client they can get their hands on. And they're scratching their heads as to why they can't get the performance because they got all this capability in the data center. So you do have to consider the capabilities of the endpoint. You know, as we bring Blast Extreme into everyday use, there are challenges, there are things that we need to consider there. And Graham's going to talk about Blast a little bit in a second. But you have to consider the thin client or the endpoint as well. That is equally important in this whole end-to-end solution, and that's why we've produced this guidance around what you can do in the data center right out through to the edge where the end user sits. You need multi-monitor support, you have high graphics requirement in your session, you want to run video, you're going to need buffer capability on the endpoint for that encode decode capability.
I want to underscore that because if you've invested all this money in creating a great user experience at the server side, right, at the host side, so you're rendering great content, right, whatever they're consuming, you've invested in that. Why would you deliver it poorly? Yeah. You know, why would you then not do the other piece of it? And certainly we don't want our GPUs being delivered poorly. We've invested in it. You're creating a great user experience. Walk it all the way to the end. Make sure that they get to receive it and equally. And the encode piece of Blast, I mean, that's a huge offload.
Yeah. And especially with NVIDIA grid cards there, what we're doing is offloading the encoding process on the vSphere host. So big benefit, we're taking the load off the physical CPU, putting it onto the NVIDIA card, so the CPU is then available for more desktops. So you're going to get better density there. That offload only works if the frame buffer is set to 1 gig or above. If you set it to 512, unfortunately, it's not going to offload that encoding process. So you're back onto CPU, you're taking away from desktops there. So there's pros and cons to both.
Right.
And we did some subjective testing that showed that GPU helps everything, and I said this in an earlier session, including like mail and email indexing, right? Which, GPUs don't help email indexing. Well, they do. If you can offload encode, that frees up CPU cycles, and you will absolutely have a better email indexing experience, whatever. But you'll have a better, the CPU is helping you in more ways than because you've freed that up. So it's an important ecosystem, and all these pieces support each other.
So I wanted to just go back to the sizing question. How do we size? And it's back to measure, and validate your assumptions at every step. So you're going to go through some form of mathematical sizing exercise based on assumptions, based on some white papers, based on hopefully some measurements you've made of your real world environment. And out of that, you're going to come out with a profile, a sizing guideline of a particular use case. I understand they consume this much compute, the disk impact is this, GPU, CPU impact is this, and I'll model that. What we always recommend is you pilot that, you make sure those assumptions are valid, and you measure again that environment to understand the actual workload. So how does that differ from what I measure in the physical? Because I've probably changed stuff, like I've moved up OS level from Windows 8 or 7 to Windows 10. I've changed my application stack, which is normally what happens. You'll introduce newer versions. So revalidate at that pilot stage, remeasure, understand the actual resource consumptions of that use case, and then you've got a value you can take and size out and scale out and understand how much CPU, how much memory, how much disk I/O you need, right? And then we actually can come back to the physical hardware and say, yes, I know how to scale this out.
And you can't manage if you can't monitor. So one of our big announcements for this particular show is that we've added a bunch of NVIDIA management library APIs and add-ins to VROPs for that very reason. Having that visibility to the application level, the process level within each individual guest as well as the hosts, so that you're not having to kill yourself to go find all those knobs to turn, instead bringing in that single pane of glass under VROPs and giving you an opportunity to solve those problems quickly.
And from our perspective, talk to your partners, because we got some data from you guys. We deployed, it worked fine for us, right? But now we're seeing the numbers that you guys have after discussing with you, and it's we are definitely looking at the next block that we build out, having potentially different mix of hardware just to meet the other demands. So.
Yeah. Tell the game design story that you said earlier today. I thought that was just because it gets back to if you build a consistent, if your infrastructure underneath is a good, consistent foundation, what else can you do with it? I thought that was...
Yeah. So we have on campus, we have a Tesseract game lab, and they're an educational unit, and what they do is it's a game development studio, and they develop games for educational experiences. And so what we did is, as soon as we got it up, we started talking to them because we had the GPUs in the environment, thought it might be a really good use case. They're using Unity, Maya, 3ds Max, a whole suite of other applications that are 3D accelerated. So what we were able to do is take the infrastructure we built for those labs and really quickly say, all right, you guys need 4 or 8 gig of VRAM for your development, but whenever you're delivering the game to the end users, they may be coming in with a MacBook Air with a low graphics profile or a Chromebook or whatever. And we can level that playing field. You can design to one target, which is a 1 or 2 gig profile with a certain number of CPUs, and you start to make it look for them like it's a console. And so they're just targeting that performance profile in their game development. So they develop on the VDI, and they deliver up a consistent experience to the users so that they can have that educational experience without stutter. Yeah.
I just think that's, from a virtualization standpoint, that flexibility, right? If I have those resources and they're easy to manage, then instead of 2 physical workstations or whatever you would have ended up delivering.
Yeah, it's a little unique, but the power of the platform is what it's really saying, is that you can just flexible.
Cool. One of the things I wanted to touch on is security. What were some of the considerations that you guys went through in regard to security? You need to keep your staff separate from your student estate. But what were some of the things and challenges that you encountered there?
We're really putting that together right now.
Okay.
So some of the things that we've thought about so far. The non-persistent desktop is huge. When you're talking about endpoints in the lab, if a student is working on a desktop and it gets infected or has a problem, then that machine is down until it can be re-imaged or whatever to fix that. But with non-persistent, you just close a session, start a new session, and they're back.
Right, so we have the framework of NSX on there, so we're micro-segmenting all of the desktops from one another, which does go to the segmenting the types of data. Yep. And then, building out those sort of quarantine models with that's what we're working on. We also, it opens the door for us to be able to say, well, we can have security boxes for them to be able to have a sandbox, blow things up that's really tight and locked down. It's not going to affect anything. They can do that sort of thing, and we can do administrative functions in VDI because we have the security wrapped around it. So then it means that we're not creating these Rube Goldbergs of jump boxes and things like that. We could just go, that's VDI, it's the same, it's a smooth experience, go for it. That's where we do the admin work. So,
Cool. Graham, anything you want to add there around AirWatch or?
Well, I think in NSX we're seeing a lot of uptake in NSX on top of Horizon. And traditionally people have gone, well, I don't need NSX, I'm not a highly secure environment. We're seeing it in more and more environments like yourself where it's not the highly secure, it's protecting the infrastructure, or it's just separating people out and protecting them from each other. It's maybe there is an element of external threats and stuff like that, but there is that separation.
If you tell your security department we can put another layer on your onion, they're largely not going to say no, right? Except maybe the price tag, but then they're going to go, yeah, sure, that sounds better.
And NSX, in that respect, we can do desktop to desktop blocking very easy, a single rule, zero trust between desktop to desktop, because generally there's no need for desktops to see each other, right? So very, very simple with NSX, as you found out, to adopt that. And you can take it further. I don't know if you've explored like identity firewalling based on who a person is and targeting a network profile for them.
Right.
Yeah, not yet.
And kind of an add-on to that then is single sign-on. How do we deal with single sign-on?
So this is part of the kind of more the journey past VDI into the digital workspace. We're seeing a lot of environments where they're recognizing, yes, they have a stack of Windows applications that they need to address and deliver to their users. But more and more we're seeing other types of applications. We're all using SaaS applications in our personal life, and we're seeing them in every single business. So it's coming up with an approach where we can give a roadmap of how we cope with all that for the end user, make it consumable from one workplace, one place, in a consistent way, and then do single sign-on. Because we don't want to make this hard for the user. We don't want them to go to one place for a SaaS application, log in with different credentials, and then go to their Windows application stack through VDI and have a different access mechanism. We want to bring this together and make this simple, standardized. And in essence, we actually don't really care whether the user accesses an application as a SaaS application, a mobile application, or a VDI application. And the user really shouldn't care either. So let's hide that, abstract that from them, give them a console like Workspace ONE, give them single sign-on, they click an icon, the application launches. Do they care how it launches? Most users know, right?
Yeah.
Now, we probably as IT, we care, right?
A lot, yes.
But that's our decision to make, right?
Yeah, can I just briefly say something?
Sure.
This is totally unplanned, but I'm thinking about it as you've layered these things up. You had said every year's been the year of VDI, and I experienced that as well. In fact, when we started having a discussion, I said, "Oh yeah, is this the year again?" And it's almost like now that everybody stopped talking about it, it's like when you're going to find the love of your life, and as soon as you stop looking, then it starts to come. The pieces seem to be finally there where the digital workspace is what you want, and the scalability piece is a part of it. Someone asked, well, you have 27,000 students, 32,000 users really. Would you be able to deliver that many desktops? No. That would be an untenable amount of money for us to be able to do that. With Workspace ONE, we can do the SaaS applications in the portal and deliver up individual applications or a desktop, whichever one they kind of need. And that's the power of the suite being able to do that, to let us use all the infrastructure we already invested in 4 different ways. So.
And an important part of Workspace ONE is AirWatch, but you haven't gone down that route yet. You're kind of in your planning for that, isn't that right?
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, we've got some licensing for it, and we're about to do a proof of concept, but we didn't. That was the secondary phase of it.
And what kind of use case are you trying to solve there with that particular aspect of Workspace ONE?
One of the things that I really like is the digital content locker. That's a piece that we've got all these shares around. So if we could have something like that, that'd be fantastic. We have a university campus, so we've got a police department. There's a lot of stuff around mobile device management that we would like to do there, and we also have athletics, right? Wupik Sui. We're trying to make sure that all of their stuff is locked behind, so they can take their tablets with them and be able to have lockdown experiences. So. Cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things with AirWatch as part of Workspace ONE. It's applying the context and applying the control to the device. We can be quite granular about how we approach that, and you can go as far as unmanaged devices. So especially your students, BY, they'll get so far with that. And if you then go to a staff member, they might bring in their own device and they can access certain type of applications, and the context will allow that. Other ones are a bit more sensitive. You might want to apply some management. You want to understand the context and the stance of the device they're accessing it with. We might then have to enforce the enrollment of that device. Something rocky here. So at that point, we say, if you want access to this, then you have a choice. You have to enroll this device. We have to have some intelligence and be able to understand the stance of that device. So you can be a bit of both, and I think absolutely, in terms of how you deliver services to your users then can be a mix of all this. Some can get SaaS only, some can get mobile devices, mobile applications on mobile devices if that's what you want to do. But you still want to put the control. You still want to have a single way of accessing that. And you also want to be swapping it at the back end if that makes your need. So it might be Office delivered to a virtual desktop today. It might be Office delivered on a tablet tomorrow.
Yeah, and in both the thin client situation and the stuff you're talking about with mobile device manager, you have to reconsider a lot of the stuff you're doing around endpoints. So it's a bit of somewhat of a cultural change. In different places it's different. For us it's a big change. Yep. It's still used to some handsets and analog phones and things like that. So we've got some hurdles. But if we start to tackle it by saying we're going to reimagine what you guys can do on your endpoints, then that's how we're going to grease the wheels. But we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
And I think one thing to recognize with endpoints, it used to be Windows. Endpoints were Windows. And then people brought their phones in and give me mail on it.
Yeah.
Now endpoints are Chromebooks, Macs, thin clients. There's lots of different clients there, and I've forgotten a few of them. The key is you don't want to have to manage them all separately in silos and worry about how I manage that, how I internet title a user, how I bring a new device out and enable somebody on it or replace it and stuff like that. You want a unified approach across the board. And you want it unified for your users as well. You want them to be able to pick up any device, including their kid's device, and use it. Yeah? And if that's an Android device that their kid might be doing some dubious stuff on, you want to be confident that the security stance of that device or how you allow the context of that device in isn't going to give you a security threat.
College students don't do dubious things on.
It's always fun to see what they bring back on campus, right? When they come back, who's new and who brought something back with them?
Well, one of the use cases we have that kind of plays into what you just mentioned is there are some faculty applications that are Windows-only applications. And of course, college professors often use Macs. So it's been very difficult for them to access those applications. So in a VDI environment, it becomes very, very simple. But security is a consideration because it's grading applications and things you wouldn't want just anybody to fall into.
Yeah.
Yeah, we made a little faculty toolbox in Workspace 1 that allows them to have all those just served up for them so they can create their classes right there with all their apps available.
Okay, so I think we've hit some really key points there and some considerations that you guys, if you haven't already started down the route of VDI, really need to strongly consider. But at this point, with about 20 minutes left, I'd like to kind of start opening it out to the floor. And if you've got questions, please step up to the mic and let's you've got some really good expertise here that you can bounce your questions off. So who wants to go first? Don't all run for the door. Go ahead, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the mic.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks very much for sharing your experience so far. It's been a very interesting discussion. My question is a topic you mightn't have covered, to data protection. Some of that may be in how you've composed your desktops and separated out. We obviously know that the virtual desktop is very different from the physical, but people have different data storage habits, we'll call them, on physicals. And my organisation has had VDI for a while, and there's different ways to tackle the challenge of the data and how to protect it. It could be a cloud-based. Sometimes there's persistent desktops or agents. Just wanted to put that topic out there. Maybe what your experience was how you guide your users maybe to think differently about the data protection, or if there's anything that you've done on the back-end infrastructure. Is there traditional file shares? Again, is there cloud services? Or did you have to consider any of the traditional backup agent type stuff for the data?
Yeah, so we have a lot of legacy Windows file shares. That's been how people have done it. And the first thing that we did was we had this thing that mapped the documents and so forth that had existed on desktops. And we just were able to put that in the VDI environment as the first step towards being able to say that's the unified place you go. But we've brought into the Box platform. That's one of the plays for it. What we've found is some of that is getting people to understand the policies and the best practices and stuff. And education is never really a silver bullet, and it usually doesn't even take hold. It doesn't always work and things like that. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at different pieces to say, all right, well, we got to start with how we tell people what they're going to do, and then also shore up over here. So for us, cloud solutions and looking at some of the endpoint protection on the box to allow us to clamp some of that down. That's really been our approach. And NSX, only gating access to the shares that we wanted to see.
I'm sorry. Nope, go ahead.
We offer them some options. As John mentioned, we're deploying Box for them to use. As Office 365 users, they have OneDrive. A lot of the students use Google Drive. We have a lot of research that goes on our university. And as you can imagine, when it's government research or military research, you have to be very, very careful with that kind of data. So we want to build and offer the appropriate kinds of storage that go along with the problem, not the problems, but the use cases which they have.
Yeah, and some of the things that we have for the on-premises solutions that we have allow us to be, compliant with these different FSMA and FERPA and things like that, so that we have some of that peace of mind, and then we just get the little last bit to shore all that up. Yeah, work in progress.
Thanks very much.
Nice to have another Irish accent in the room. Hopefully everybody else understood you.
I think one of the key things, when we're talking about data is, get it off the desktop. One of the reasons you're virtualizing is to get rid of all these physical endpoints.
Exactly.
So they're usually dirty with lots of data, and that's a security risk, or you lose data and stuff like that. Centralizing the desktops allows you to centralize the data at the same time. So take it off the desktops, make sure even if you're doing persistent that you don't keep user data on it. There's there for a different reason. Use folder redirection, use file shares, use whatever mechanism you want, but don't store it on the desktops. And then protect it wherever you stored it.
We're doing everything we can to not have persistent desktops.
That's right. That is our goal.
And frankly, take out University of Arkansas, drop in NVIDIA, and the answer is the same. I mean, we're going through the same cultural process and the same methodologies to solve their data problem. I mean, any organization.
Got another question?
Yes. Actually, you just started to lead into my question. So, what have you done about users who think they're special? So, yeah. We are
It's a great question.
starting a VDI rollout right now, but I've got people on my own team who say, no, I'm special. I'm not going to use VDI. I still need a physical desktop because I'm the admin of it. Or I'm willing to use it, but there's no chance in heck I'm using a non-persistent desktop.
So I'm going to take that because we're at a university.
That's aimed at you.
Literally everyone is a special snowflake at a university. For us, everyone's like, I have unique needs, my demands are totally different, and all that sort of stuff. We have encountered that, and where we can, what we attack it with is just better solutions. Being able to show them the value proposition of it, like basically. We're not just taking this and replacing it with that. You also get these things. So can you just please try it out? Like give it a shot, right? And then when the experience is the same or better, and then they also have something like we've integrated this piece of software that allows us to map some of the cloud storage directly to the desktop. When they have that sort of it's map drive, but it's my cloud storage, that's a better experience, which wins them over. So for us, we have to win the argument, and then we have to win them over with that.
Take them back to what is the requirement? What are you trying to accomplish? What is important to you about where the data is, or is it persistent or non-persistent? What is it that you're trying to do? And then, as John said, help them understand that with VDI, it's so flexible when it comes to that we can solve their problems and then more.
And I would say going down the stack, right? Like Stephen's way of phrasing that's very diplomatic. The people who I have that are more admin level are like, what are you trying to solve for? Come on, like, what do you really, like, let's have a conversation about this. Tell me what you're trying to do, and we'll suss that out together, right? There's a difference in the way you phrase it, though, depending on who you're dealing with, that will get you at the real problem that they might be thinking they're having.
One of the things for me is the user experience. So if you can't deliver the user experience that they get with their desktop, you're goosed. You're never going to win that person over. They're always going to fight against it. So that's where, back to what we were talking about earlier on, is really understanding the requirements of your user estate, making sure that you really validate your assumptions. So going and doing proper POCs with really key stakeholders being involved in that, so that you really drive the requirements to what they actually need rather than what you assume they need. If you assume they need it and you don't deliver enough, then you're going to be in trouble, and it's going to be a painful process to keep them going in the same direction as you.
And you've made me think. Sometimes it could be that you deliver one app that they really need, but that's the only. You're like, this is the only vehicle we're going to deliver it through. You must use that system to get this app because we're not going to invest our time in two different places. And then slowly, maybe they have 3-4 apps, and they're using it, and if it's fine, then they just seamlessly transition. It's another method.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
My question's for John and also to Graham. So I'm curious as to how you achieved your project delivery of this wonderful pyramid you're showing up here in such a short time. Specifically more so, how much of the vendor partnership was involved in delivering that project for you? Specifically more so because you are deploying disruptive technologies, not only to us, but to our user community. And what did that do to your operations staff?
Okay. So from the vendor side, we had talked to vendors and said we wanted to do something a little disruptive, something transformative on campus. And so because we were bought in the idea and they were trying to pitch this in different ways, the vision came together. It wasn't necessarily they just sold us on an idea. It was kind of like, yeah, we see that too. And their involvement was, Dell came in and recommended the vSAN Ready nodes. They said this is something that'll get you where you need to go. It's got all the bits in it, and you won't have to think about that piece. And for me, I said, oh, that'd be great from an operational standpoint. I own the server side as well, and I'm like, all right, well, we can do some of this software-defined storage pieces with vSAN. Then that allows me to not have to think about my storage. My VM admins can be my storage admins and so forth. So I would say that simplicity from the Dell side was really good. And then NVIDIA coming in and helping us think through the problem to win the argument. The thing that really won people over was, look, every device that you're using has a GPU in it. Why are we going to make VDI different? Why would we do that? And it was through a series of conversations. They didn't feed us the line and say, like, go use that. We really came to that conclusion together and said, yeah, let's do it this way. So I'd say vendor involvement was really, really key. We also signed an ELA with VMware to get some of the suite of tools that allowed us to do that. We engaged professional services. We had some amazing partners, a couple in this room. There's a funny story that David would love for me to tell about how we were deploying on Horizon, and I'll try to make this quick. We were deploying on Horizon 6.0, and we were looking at NS 6.2, and NSX 6.3 came out on a Thursday afternoon, and we went, let's comb through the release notes and see if this is a worthwhile thing for us to do. And as we started going through it, it was like, problem with upgrade, we're going to upgrade that, and then you're going to have this sort of issue. And we said, can we just blow this all away and start with 6.5 and go to 6.3 NSX and maybe do it? And so from that Friday, we kind of destroyed most of what we had and rebuilt it in another day. But we could do that because the architectural foundation was strong. The hardware was already there. The software for the storage was already there. There was no reconfiguration of that. All we had to do was stand up a few more servers, reconfigure a few things, and then we were up by that Monday on the new environment. So that, I will say that the technologies really do allow us to have speed. And then, like I said earlier about embedding people from other teams, if you don't have if your storage admins are siloed and they're going to care about that, maybe get them plugged in. Networking absolutely needs to be embedded in your team to make that as smooth as possible. But yeah, being able to deploy it in a couple months, especially with blowing it away in a day, it was just a matter of the technology.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question.
So I come from the AEC industry, and I'm curious, when you did the app volumes, we're currently doing persistent desktops with Grid K2 cards, and we're looking at moving into the newer cards. Any issues with software like AutoCAD and Revit on app volumes?
We've tackled the Autodesk. It mounts very fast. We're on app volumes 2.12, which is the one everyone needs to be on. We'll wink to the previous version. And so we haven't, the attach times are very fast. The load times are faster because we're on that the flash storage. We didn't really encounter there were no showstoppers or anything like that. Just a couple of things where, pops up and says, I wanna do the first time setup stuff. You use UEM to get rid of some of that, and it worked. Everything that we put in there, I can't think of an exception, so I'll say pretty much everything that we put in there with app volumes and try to deliver up has worked. The only trigger we saw was app volumes attaching to 2016. 2012 just seems to work better for some applications, and 2016 for other applications. So just finding out which one works best. But it's been seamless for us. Okay,
no issues with the add-ons in Revit? 'Cause I don't know how deep you guys go into this. There's a lot of add-ons that attach to Revit that run with it. No issues with those? We haven't gone down the add-ons for Revit specifically. We've got some for like Excel and some Adobe stuff that we've got some add-ons there, and they seem to work. It's really, that's UEM magic, I think, is largely the customization of the app volume, and then. And I say UEM because we've added some like GPO policies and some things about the profile, because some applications want to deploy to an individual user profile. So you got to work through it. But we have a team of, I didn't say this, but and I should have. We got a team of 3.5 people, and we're deploying all this stuff. So there's one guy who's just
gritty as all can be, and he gets in there, fights it, gets frustrated, goes, smokes a cigarette, comes back, fights it again, right? And so it takes a little bit of work and some grit, but we've powered through it with a small team.
Okay. Last question. Can I take you guys back to my board for a day?
But I think, going in app volumes, I think it's key to pair that with User Environment Manager and use that to configure the application. App volumes is the delivery mechanism. UEM, User Environment Manager, is the configuration and the control settings. A couple of rules with app stacks, app volumes, put them on nice fast storage because they're read-only to the users, so it should be relatively easy to provide that I/O load. Then you'll reduce attach times. Keep the number of app stacks per user relatively low, single digits, below 5 if possible, ideally 2 or 3. Right? The reason for that is a couple of things. One, the more app stacks, the more infrastructure and attach calls I need to call. So I'm putting load on my virtual center, I'm putting load on the host time, also spending time doing that attachment, so my log-on time goes up. Right? So we typically see it go from maybe 8 seconds with no app stacks to probably about 15 seconds with 2 app stacks. It's a good figure. So the more app stacks I add, the more I spend on log-on. The other thing you could see an impact is application launch. Right? Part of the app stack, we've got different virtual disks segments making up my virtual desktop. If I launch an application that's in the 5th app stack, I need to search through all of them, I need to enumerate them. So my application is going to take longer to launch, which for a user isn't great. So keep it smaller. The last thing on app stacks is, if you're putting something like Excel with lots of add-ons or AutoCAD and stuff like that, bundle everything that's needed for an application stack into one app stack itself. Don't spread them across 2 app stacks, because if I detach that one, I've broken the application. It needs to sit all together.
One thing, you said 8 to 15 seconds on the apps. We've got our Windows 10 login time down to 15 seconds total, including app stacks, UM, all that stuff. So there's even some you can squeeze out. I don't know exactly what my wizard admin has done. He's got a document of all that stuff, but he's really got the performance out of that, because we saw a little bit of a bump with app volumes, but it was sort of negligible after we...
And that kind of thing can then help you go back to how do I address those special users, who want their persistent desktops or who don't want VDI at all, Give them a 15-second log on versus what they're used to in the physical desktop. They start to see the benefits sometimes.
Yeah, because it spreads to everybody.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hello. Hey, Carlos Herrera with the University of New Mexico, and we're about to start a POC to do our kiosk on VDI. And so I'm curious about the networking side of your VDI project. You said that it was about 6 months that it took to deploy, right?
Yeah, it was to get the labs installed. It took about 3 months.
Okay, so you had a network in place, obviously, before that was very robust, and I want to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah,
thanks.
So we have what was great is that on our infrastructure side, a data center network, we were actually able to build this, what we call a pillar of excellence, which is a new data center with our spine leaf architecture. So we solved that problem. Then we started thinking about the endpoints and what they were going to do. So they had been beefing up the infrastructure to get ready for VoIP. Again, we had just now getting to VoIP. So they had done that to get 10 gig to the building, 1 gig to the desktop. That kind of existed. But again, you start to scale it up, your 10 gig pipe starts to look a little weaselly. Blast Extreme is one of those things that we can optimize for the types of pipes we have. So we had a couple instances where we had some people out at the end of a fiber run, and they had very old switches, and they were on I think they just had 100 meg, and then horrible stuff outside there, right? So we optimized for them to basically be able to sip about a meg to deliver the experience, and it's not amazing, but it works. It's being able to deliver something like that on older infrastructure, and then of course when they upgrade that infrastructure, they can then get a better experience.
And we can automate that as well. We have User Environment Manager has bandwidth profiles as part of smart policies, so we can automate. I understand how you're connecting through because we put conditions and policy in place. You're coming from an older network. I'm going to tailor your bandwidth profile, the BLAST protocol, to a particular setting that's going to give you the best experience based on the conditions you're coming from. And you know what, if you come in, you're connecting from a 1 gig, I'm going to give you a different profile and you get the full experience because we're capable of delivering it. So we can automate all that and make it transparent to the user.
And there's a lot of information out there. So, if you look at our VxRail with Horizon 7 reference architecture. So you just go into Google, Dell EMC, VxRail, Horizon 7 reference architecture. You'll get a very, very detailed document that goes through a lot of strong recommendations from a networking and a storage perspective. So you should definitely do your research on that. And, okay. All right, we're in the last 4 minutes. Any other questions? Okay, so I think we'll probably wrap up. VDI Complete, as I said, what we're trying to solve in partnership with VMware and NVIDIA. This is a three-way partnership. We have a dedicated VDI Complete booth out on the floor. Again, this is a three-way thing. We're trying to solve this complexity of deploying VDI and make it as simple as possible, and even package it up into an OpEx payment model through Dell Financial Services. So if you haven't already seen it, go check out the stand. We've got a Coke Pepsi challenge that will show you the difference between a non-GPU enabled session and a GPU enabled session. And that's on a, the tendency with those type of things is we heavily optimize the one we want to promote, and we heavily hammer the one we don't want to promote. But in this particular case, we put a real world solution together, so there are dozens and dozens of sessions running on the infrastructure for that particular demonstration. And what you'll see is a very significant performance difference. Now it's a very graphically intensive workload that we're running on that, but it's well worth checking out. Okay. Any other final questions before we wrap up? Any final comments from the panel?
Just want to say we wish that VDI Complete was around when we did this.
Yeah.
It would have made our lives so much easier.
Yeah, unfortunately we only launched in May, so we had to
just behind it.
Yeah, we had to leverage vSAN ready nodes, and I mean we leveraged a lot of what is VDI Complete today in their solutions.
That's correct. Yeah.
Bringing that simplicity to large scale deployments and even to small scale deployments. You can start with 3 nodes. Is what we're trying to achieve here. Graham, anything you want to finish with?
No final remarks. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. Luke?
Yeah, no, thank you, and thanks to the university for their detail.
Absolutely, great session. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap on that. Thanks very much.
Yeah.